The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Right, thank you for joining us. This is Kevin from Symtrax. Hope you're all well. Just wanted to quickly run through the second in our three-part series, webinar series that is, which covers off smart invoice management for your SAP environment. So what I'll do is I'll focus on your SAP's environment and start from there like I did before. But what I'll do is we'll quickly wait just for a few others to join us so we can not miss anybody or be delayed further. So I appreciate your time. So what I'll do is we'll kickstart now and run through a quick presentation and then jump straight into a demonstration as well. So what we'll do here is we'll quickly run through who we are for those who haven't. There's a couple that haven't been on previous sessions. So what I'll quickly do is I'll run through Symtrax, who we are, then cover off the document process automation element, and cover off the challenges as well around e-invoicing, and then go through a demonstration using our Compleo Suite to improve and to automate as much as we possibly can around invoicing, and then leave plenty of time for Q&A. So Symtrax, we're a family-run organization. We've been around for 35 years-ish. So clearly from our perspective, we've focused almost entirely on document process automation. We've been around, as I said, for 35 years. We've got just over 4,000 customers in all sorts of different sectors. We've got a global presence with 70 staff, and we cover all the major vendors, including SAP, which I'll focus on today during this session. So we'll kick off around document process challenges. First of all, for me personally, this is an important educational tool when talking about document flows and document processes within our digital economy now. So people have quite high, sophisticated levels of expectations, and indeed the challenges as well. So not avoiding bottlenecks, streamlining as much as possible from a document perspective, and dealing with the document evolution process, which I'll touch on as well, which basically allows documents to flow around the organization as smoothly as possible without falling foul of any regulations and so on, but keeping pace with things like industry standard barcodes and so on, as well as making documents accessible on all sorts of different devices. So just to cover off the most basic element around this whole process, which is the e-invoicing, the process, the challenges and the needs, which we covered off last time. But during this session, instead of focusing on the formatting, we'll focus on the distribution. So focus on the traceability, the security and the performance, as well as helping and automating as much as possible around document flows as well. So not just sending off PDFs and finding out where PDFs are, but keeping a track of it and keeping that workflow going. So from a Compleo Suite perspective, as I touched on last time, we focus with varieties of different tools that we have in our disposal. We have the formatting element, which is the layout solution we've got, and that allows organizations to essentially bring out output from SAP, reformat that and push that on from a distribution perspective, which is the major suite, which is sort of a start to finish aspect, the server side, which is our supervisor, and that can then allow organizations to distribute that, process that, and eventually archive it as well, but keeping it secure within staff and suppliers environments, rather than allowing it to just end up in the wrong hands with so often these PDFs are. So Jumping straight to the demonstration. So, as I mentioned, the first part was around formatting a document. This second session is around distributing the document, and we'll focus on sort of three key areas, which is emailing these PDFs out, as well as putting links into the embed them within the email itself, and then cover off the transparency around the whole process and how that actually works, and who that data might flow to, as well as keeping information as compliant and regulatory as possible, especially along the lines of the GDPR element as well. So what we'll do is, as I've highlighted here, the next session will be maybe the interesting session, the most interesting, shall I say, around automation and how this whole document process flow can be automated and streamlined. So I'll touch on how things can be distributed, and touch on very briefly how the workflows work as well. So in this specific example that I'll go through is an ERP user who creates who needs to create a purchase order for a supplier, and that in turn needs to be reviewed internally and then signed by a director signatory, and then onto the supplier to fulfill the orders. And then the interesting point is essentially, once that work's been carried out, the invoice clearly needs to come back to the organization in whatever means, and how that then gets processed. Essentially, your accounts department receives these orders, and that has to essentially align them up with existing purchase orders as well, and then manages for validation, and then go back to the accounts to be paid. So making the whole process as streamlined as possible. So what I'll do is I'll quickly jump into that session. So I'll hop into our environment, and what I'll do is I'll start the process. So I'll create the purchase order. I'll find the purchase order we'd like. That's the purchase order that I've created before. And what I'll do is I'll simply print. So as the manager, the ERP user, he then creates this purchase order and now needs to distribute it out to the supplier. But before that gets done, as you can see here, there's clearly thresholds being 100,000, which is a large purchase order, a large promise to pay, purchase to pay even, purchase order even. So essentially that gets paid. Clearly that's a positive sound where it's been processed. So what happens, as I've highlighted before, the back-end solution will generate or kick off the process. But what I will do is I will touch on something I've touched on before and kickstart this process in a manual way, just so things are a bit easier to keep up with. So in the same way, this is the actual, if I zoom out here, you'll you'll recognize the layout of this document, and this is essentially the final view. So what we've done is we've added a purchase order number within the barcode, which is quite useful, and within our layout solution, it's very much configured in the right sort of way, whereby you create a lot of these templates and views, and we've created a test phase, so essentially whether it's active or not, and whether changes have been made. And then within the actual reviewer run mode, you've got the reviewer. So essentially what I'll show you, which is the interesting part, is these emails will be sent out, so not just PDFs, but actually the reviewer element, which generates these workflows. So what I will explain here is that then connects with our server, and it uses clearly one element. And what this will do is it'll then keep track of, as metadata, it'll keep track of the amounts, the purchase orders and supplies and so on, and keep a record of that as it flows through the system. So what I will do is I will kick that off, and essentially manually kick off that process. And what will happen is that will then relay into the supervisor, which will then kickstart process, which is then happened. And what I'll do here is I will jump into the emails, and now we kickstart. So essentially what's happened is, as I've mentioned, the ERP users now seeking approval from a manager, the purchase order number, the amount. So what we'll do is clearly see that the template has been relayed, some barcodes have been added as well, but what happens with the blank here, which is important, is the signature that hasn't been. So what I'll do is I'll quickly jump out of our system and into the actual manager's view URL. So this is them physically logging in. So as you can see at the top left hand side, there's activities that need to be done. So this now needs to be the live purchase order, which you can recognize the purchase order number from. And as I mentioned, the barcodes are associated. It's got all the formatting, and all we're after before the approval is making a quick statement or a note. You can either accept or reject that. So what we'll do is we'll accept that, and what that's essentially done is that has now activated the process to the next position, and these will be all emailed and so on. As I can see here, we'll log into the director, but before we do that, we can see the managers validated it. It's now been approved by the manager. It's now been passed on to the director's email. Essentially, we're using one email at the moment, but let's ignore that for now. So what we're essentially doing is we are, apologies for jumping in and out, I'm just trying to give you a flavor of what needs to be done. Again, what can be done here is we can add the signature, the all-important signature. So with the mobile capability, with our the console, we can actually add in an ink-printed signature as well. But in this case, we're using the desktop version, and then we put the signature in, and essentially that's all enabled with dates and formatting and so on. And that's now been accepted. So the director's now reviewed it. Now what needs to happen now is that's then essentially, as per the emails, we'll then refresh that. So that's now essentially been sent out to the supplier. And what we'll do is we'll get ready for, from a demo perspective, we'll get into the accounts department. So as you can see here, at the moment, there's no invoices that have been received. So what we can do here is now the suppliers receive that invoice, so the supplier can then see it and accept it. So essentially that's now the newly formatted straight out of SAP. It's all been formatted, all the barcodes have come through, the amounts are correct, and what we'll do now is we will refresh this. Oh, sorry, hang on, one more thing is I've got to now activate the invoice. So essentially simulate an invoice coming into the system. So what we do here, so apologies for jumping around here, what we'll do is we'll have to print out the invoice. So in this specific example, what we'll do is, as you can see here, we'll print the invoice out. But it's not using a normal printer. What we'll do here is we'll print and send it and continue the flow back into the system as input into our reviewer demo example for incoming invoices even. So that invoice clearly relates to the other £100,000 invoice. So that's now activated, it's now sent to a specific location, and what will happen within the environment, it'll then say, right, is now available to the supply, which I've already sort of touched on. Now what we'll do here is we'll jump into another system. So that's what we're essentially going to see. We're going to see the accounting invoice that was sent through and has now hit the system. So what we'll do is we'll jump out of there, jump back into the login, and we've got that invoice. So what we can do is we can manually, this can be automated, but at the moment this specific example is manual. So you can type in the correlating invoice number to there. Hopefully it does that up. You can add into IT department, and that's relevant because essentially what we'll be doing from now on, let's put it to finance, sorry. What we'll do is we'll actually, that will be assigned to a specific person who needs to approve this, this invoice. I'll leave the supplier information out just for now, but I'll simulate this invoice being approved by the accounts team. And now what will be the case is it'll then, so we'll log out of there. And what will happen, as we can see here in a short while, this is the whole automated process even. This will now generate an email for the department, so the finance manager. And what that will then do is if we jump into here we go, that then needs to be reviewed. So your department then has the right invoice for your department. You've now got to review it and approve it. Okay, fantastic. What I'll do is I'll jump into my system as the finance manager. So finance demo manager, which we've assigned that invoice to. He then has a task, and he can then review the invoice that's come through. Thank you very much. Oops, sorry about this. Invoice number, yep, great. So that's now been approved by the department manager. And what will then happen essentially from here is this finance manager has approved the invoice, and now the accounts team would need to essentially pay for this invoice, which has now come through now. So essentially all aligned to the invoice number. It's got the amount. So again, as it shows here, the invoice has been passed to the accounts team. So I will log in as the accounts team. And what do we have here? We've got a task which has gone from assigning to payment validation. So what we're essentially going to do here is align right, sorry, I should have put the internal order number, which is the PO number. Apologies for that. Oh, there we go. It's been approved, and now it's been passed on. So where would it have been passed on to? So one, it's essentially been paid, and then you look at the finance manager who's keen to find out how it's all been processed. Will log in and find out, rather than emailing and phoning the accounts team to find out when it's been done. You can essentially come into this console, go to the archiver, access that document, going through a quick search option, and what there will be is there will then be the invoice. Sorry, where are we? Will then be the invoice that needs to be paid. So that's that. So then we'll do here, because I didn't put the invoice number in, that has now been paid. I should have put the invoice number in there, but essentially that then allocates that to have been paid. So what we've got here is we've essentially got the going back there. So yeah, so essentially we've got the full loop, and essentially the supplier has the internal customer has now received the goods. The supplier's now been paid, and everybody's been involved in the whole process, as well as this archiving element, which has now stored the document and you can then backtrack and find, based on the metadata, those customers with the relevant details. So I will hop back into this PowerPoint session. So just to recap about the supplier, you've seen essentially the ERP user, creating the PO, approvals, then onto the supplier. Then the suppliers essentially deliver the goods, and then needs to send an invoice. The invoice received as it's already been outlined to the accounts team. The managers and the finance manager in this specific example has authorized the payment, and the payment has been made by the accounts team. So quite simply, as you can see, this whole distribution of documents and invoices and what I've essentially gone back on is starting this whole process around POs, purchase orders, and that all being secured within our own web access portal, whether that's on a desktop, online, or via a mobile, and then allows your collections team to recognize where that document is, and indeed the managers that have approved it can access it and see the status within the archived solution. And this has obviously all been streamlined, and any part of this can be integrated. So I showed you a slight manual part, which is actually adding in the purchase order numbers and so on, which I unfortunately didn't quite add the purchase order number just at that precise moment, but it allows for manual intervention, which is clearly in this case has gone wrong, but you can streamline that into an automated solution. So that was one element. The previous element that I showed you about formatting is about distributing in different languages and so on. But what I touched on as far as the distribution is actually getting the emails out, the PDFs out, getting the links there, allowing users to see, or the people on this session to see how this is actually the approval process works, how invoices come back into the system, and how that all gets approved and paid to the supplier. So hopefully a nice easy solution for yourselves within an SAP environment. And as I've mentioned, today's session around distribution hopefully was useful. What I'm hoping to touch on the 3rd of May is more around the automation and how that actually works behind the scenes, and what parts can be automated and what parts are sort of manual, what parts in some ways can't always be manual. And something to touch on for further notice, advance warning if you can call it that, is a workshop around for customers and indeed people who are interested to find out a bit more around the document process automation. And that's planned in our London office, so please feel free to get in touch with me, and we can sort of include you in those sessions as well. So that's all I've got time for. Apologies for running over slightly, but there's my details, and feel free to contact me and email me or telephone me, or indeed download the Compleo Suite and trial it yourself. And there's the link. I'll leave that up for now, but obviously if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Just looking at the questions. At the moment there aren't any questions, so I've obviously covered a lot. What I'll do is I'll certainly share the video and the slides like I did last time, and what we've touched on is quite an automated process. I appreciate the first session was a lot more manual from a formatting perspective, but the distribution I tried to show you that you can manually start something. You can essentially be as automated or as manual as your process requires, and obviously the most critical element around this is the ROI, and the ROI is incredibly quick, as I've already outlined. To create a template, to start the whole process working, doesn't take more than sort of a couple of weeks to get even some of the largest environments up and running. So hope the session's been useful. I'll certainly get in touch with yourselves at a later date, but look forward to you joining us for the next session. So thanks. That's all we've got time for, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much.